Good afternoon. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat Cabinet Member for Housing here at Portsmouth City Council. Thanks to everybody who's come and thanks to the brave people who are watching on our webcast. I'll start before the meeting is concerned just with a few points of information with regards to some process issues. The first is a bit of housekeeping. Forgive me, I'm going to have to read from this just to make sure the rules are right. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust fire marshal regulations, we're in a building run by the Portsmouth Cultural Trust. Anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should remember to sign out when leaving the building after the meeting. As I've said before, this meeting is going to be live streamed. This is for a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room. The recording will be on the council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, which may be a good thing, but there will be some footage of them as they approach. Good afternoon. Hello. Thank you for coming in. There will be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not want to be recorded. Please, can everyone use the microphones provided in front of you when they are speaking? It's usually best to press the button on your right, as that is the best way forward. There's lots of people here, for which many, many thanks. So can I start with sort of introductions so everybody knows who everybody is? I have been introduced, so I'll start on my left here.
I'm Councillor Tom Coles. I'm the Labour spokesman for housing.
Luke Stokes, Conservative spokesman.
Maria Cole, representing the Residents Consortium.
Mada Abraham, CLG member.
Alwyn Oliver from a letting agent. Oh,
That's right. Mrs. Abraham, please could you switch off your microphone? Thank you very much. That's okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming.
did you want me to finish? Alwyn Oliver from a company called Flats in Southsea. I'm an accredited letting agent and accredited landlord.
Thank you, Alwyn.
Stephen Wiley, an interested resident.
Martin Solman, Portsmouth and District Private Landlords Association.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Bruce Lomax, Head of Private Sector Housing at Portsmouth City Council.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director Housing, Portsmouth City Council.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance for Portsmouth City Council.
I'm James Hill, the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services for Portsmouth City Council.
Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director, Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services.
Joanne Miles-Smith, Democratic Services.
Thank you very much, as I said. Thank you all for coming. Now, there are various items on the agenda today, the first of which is apologies for absence. Joanne, do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies just from one of the deputies today, Eleanor Scott, and she's submitted a written deputation instead, but your opposition spokespeople are here.
Excellent, thank you, and I've read that deputation. We may return to that in a bit. Secondly, and this is primarily for the three political spokespeople here, do either of you have declarations of interest, Tom or Luke? I do. I have a personal but not prejudicial interest in both items. In item 3, I have a personal but not prejudicial interest as I live in a HMO. In item 4, I have a personal but not prejudicial interest as my mother lives in one of the blocks affected. Both of those have been cleared with the city solicitor, which is usually important in this line of work. I'll also a bit of explanation as to how I want to organise this meeting. This is a decision-making meeting. Many councils don't have meetings like this that involve opposition spokespeople, but we're interested in more open and transparent approach. So what I would like to do is I'll take the items in order, and we have two oral deputies, for which I'm very grateful, Olwyn and Martin. So before the presentation from the officers, I would like each of you to put forward your thoughts on item number 3. Then what I will do is that the officers will give a presentation, and then I will ask Tom, Luke, and Residents Consortium and CLG representative colleagues to offer up their own questions. We won't be interacting with the deputies as per the rules, but we look forward to your pertinent comments as we go along. And then there'll be and then I will sum up the discussion at the end. I may also ask some questions as I'm going along. The same sort of procedure will apply for number 4, which is a report on the 2 blocks. However, as there are no deputies for that bit of the process isn't needed. So, Olwyn, Martin, who wishes to go first?
Thank you, Martin. As I've said, my name's Olwyn Oliver. I am a landlord. I've been a landlord for a number of years. I also run a small letting agency, and in both capacities, I'm accredited with Portsmouth City Council. I believe I'm the only person accredited both as a landlord and as a letting agent. The other thing I should just tell you is I live in Southsea, next door to a HMO, Villiers Road, so it's a very nice one, but still a HMO, which accommodates students. And largely what I want to say, the first and foremost thing I want to say, is that we are with you in terms of where we wish to get to. I don't like waste being left by HMOs moving out, and it is predominantly end of tenancy waste that causes, I suspect, the bulk of your complaints, and certainly the bulk of our problems in our interaction with our tenants or former tenants. As I travel around, the last thing I want to see is bags of waste. I nearly got stung a few days ago because there were wasps circling the bin bags. So I think we both agree on what we want. What I think I would like to tell you just a bit about is the kind of interactions we have with our students. And the first thing to say is I think that waste management is pretty low on their list of priorities. I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. And the second thing is I think that the City Council is not nearly clear enough in its communication to tenants and its communication to the public on the website about what is appropriate and what is required. And this is a real live issue, and it's not as if we haven't asked before. So what I think is needed is a really clear message on the website that bin bags need to be disposed of, can't be left out for more. There is a potential for a fine, and there is a potential, more importantly, for a landlord to charge you for that service, or for the city to charge you for that service, if that's what's required. If I give you an example of 2 houses that checked out on Sunday, both properties were left clean, both tenants paid with one exception right throughout the year on time. They were exemplary tenants expecting a full deposit. They both left with bin bags, in one case about 6 or 8 bin bags containing food waste, in one case a full green wheelie bin and a little bit more waste. We arranged a licensed waste carrier, one on a Sunday afternoon, one costing £55, another costing 30, that we sought to the charge to the tenants. In both cases, they were highly indignant, didn't realise they could be fined. Now, in all of those cases, they were told long time in advance that if waste wasn't removed, it wasn't acceptable to leave it. On a previous occasion, I've had tenants phone the City Council and be told, or at least relay to me, that it's fine that waste is left in forecourts, sometimes for days on end. We don't think it is. I don't think that's acceptable. But the message that's come from the City Council is that that is okay, and that it is not appropriate for me as an agent to seek to dock their deposit or seek payment because of that's what's been done. And I had this message twice on Sunday from these 2 people. We removed the waste, by the way. Removal of the waste isn't the issue, it's who pays for it. And we think if we've put tenants on notice that that's a possibility, if we've put it in the tenancy agreement that they can be charged, that we have given them specific costings. In our tenancies, we give them end of tenancy cleaning guidelines and a written detailed quote of what will happen if they don't. So we think we've done enough. But the problem I have with the paper that's in front of you is it suggests that landlords might be fined for leaving that waste. So how would you come to that decision? My concern is that officers might be put in a position where they can find tenants, or if they can't find the tenants, and let's face it, they're students, so they'll have left, find landlords. We're a large organised, well, 50. We manage nearly 50 properties, so we can be a bit more interactive. But if I give you an example of one of my fellow landlords who manages 2 properties and spends part of her time in Greece, she's an exemplary landlord, by the way, has somebody visit the property every month in her absence. But there would be no way of her knowing from Greece, where she is today, I've spoken to her on the phone, whether or not tenants are gone. Because often they don't tell us. They won't tell us because they're worried about being fined for bin bags. And they won't tell her because she's not in the country. And they'll fly tip bin bags. So what I think is needed is, first of all, you will have seen, I'm sure, and your officers will have seen, houses in multiple occupation, residential tenancy licensing reform from the government, from the Ministry of Housing, CLG, last week. And just to read from that, local authorities should be mindful that HMOs are residential properties and they should provide a comprehensive and frequent waste collection service for such households which is free at the point of use. And this includes HMOs which are occupied by students. Accordingly, it would not be appropriate for authorities to levy commercial waste charging on such residential properties. Now, I'm aware that under Section 48, I think it is the Environmental Protection Act, if it's left for 7 days, it becomes commercial waste. That's 7 days after the end of the tenancy. In my case, the tenancy may not end for another month. So what I think is needed, what my concern with fines for landlords or tenants or letting agents who have done everything right by notifying tenants is that it won't solve the problem. It'll be a good way of collecting revenue, but the city will be alive with rats. If you actually want to solve the problem, I think there needs to be a service where people can phone up and say, I have some bin bags on a non-bin bag day, and have it picked up. And I'm going to suggest to you, if it's booked 2 weeks in advance, it should be free of charge. I don't think it ever will be, by the way, because I've said I think the disposal of waste is seen as a pretty low priority. At the very least, and it will cost nothing, I suggest a link on the website saying what's required and what the penalties would be if it's not required, and what you encourage landlords to do, perhaps remove at cost. And I'm aware my time's running out. I would like to get to the point where I don't have to look at bin bags any more than you do. But I suggest the first thing you should do is look at these responsibilities. I accept they're very new. And the second thing is I think there needs to be a strong message. And the third thing is I think you need to do more about non-bin day collection and then in HMOs and work out how that's paid for, perhaps as a way of going forward. So rather than fine us, talk to us. Thank you very much, by the way, for allowing me to come today. I'm aware that I've taken a bit more of my time than I should have done. And I'm also aware that you've allowed me to come at very short notice, so thank you for that.
No trouble, Alwyn, and thank you very much for your comments. Martin.
Good afternoon, everybody. I concur with just about everything Olwen has said. The last couple of years there have been talks of bins at the ends of certain streets when students are moving out, and out-of-hours collections or unscheduled collections. And I think PCC have had the right ideas over the past 2 or 3 years, but unfortunately none of them ever came to fruition during June and July when they were needed. And instead we trialled bin schemes that were wholly inappropriate when all the students move out. But anyway, onto my deputation. I'll keep it brief. You know the Landlords Association are keen to work with the council and are generally supportive of anything that improves relations, so antisocial behaviour, rubbish, anything else, we'll do what we can. And I wholly agree with all of your sentiments in yesterday's paper. However, I don't think this supports those sentiments in any way, shape or form. So basically just a couple of procedural points. This is very vague. It constantly quotes 2004 Housing Act, the 2016 Housing and Planning, the 2006 HMO, and when you pick up those references, they are vague in themselves. They outline what is allowable. They don't specify what is allowed, and this doesn't either. So my concern at the moment, you have the ability to criminally prosecute anyone who creates an offence by leaving rubbish where they shouldn't, and the burden of proof in the court of law is on you guys to show that they've broken the law, and if they have, they'll be dealt with. By making this a civil act, it basically makes it like a parking offence, and a council officer can decide who's at fault, when they're at fault, how they're at fault, and issue a charge. And unless you get to the second level of appeal at a first-tier tribunal, it's the council who decides whether it's valid or not. So I'm happy for that sort of approach to be used as long as the rules are clear, and there are no rules in here. There's no definition of what the offence is. It's very, very vague in terms of policy, and the context isn't clear either. Just an example, number of complaints received. Is that just for HMOs, or is that number of complaints received in total? I'm not expecting an answer. I know we don't talk. I'd like to see both, to see whether HMOs really are growing out of proportion to everything else or not, because I don't think the evidence in its current form supports what you're proposing, and what you're proposing is vague. So really, all I'm asking for is if you could do a little stronger or better government in implementing this, rather than just sign it in its current form, I think life would be better for everyone going forward. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much. The report is in James's name. James, are you going to put it forward, or is Bruce going to put it forward? I don't mind who.
If you may, Chair, it's in my name, but Bruce will introduce and talk to the report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, this is a report for the proposed changes of the current enforcement policy, which is used by private sector housing. The last policy was introduced in the July of 2007, and since then we have had a number of legislation changes. And the paper now is to show those specific legislation changes in order for us to deal with certain issues in relation to houses in multiple occupation throughout the city of Portsmouth. The main issues that we do, or what we are trying to address really here, are the issues relating to the management of houses in multiple occupation, and specifically under the management regulations. We are allowed to impose a civil penalty if a landlord fails those management regulations, or if a tenant fails those regulations as well. And in relation to the two main areas that we've been discussing, which is waste management, Regulation 7 places a duty directly onto the management, onto the manager, to ensure that outbuildings, yards and forecourts which are used by anybody within the property are kept in a clean condition. And also it places a direct duty onto the manager to provide receptacles for the storage of waste bins, and also to make sure that the tenants do act in accordance with any local waste management collection routine. But the management regulations also place a duty on the occupants of the property themselves as well. So if the landlord or the person in control of that property has instructed the tenants to store their waste in a particular manner, and also to put it out on a particular day in accordance with the local waste authority, which is Portsmouth City Council, and the tenants fail to do that, then the tenants themselves could also be fined under the Civil Penalties Act for breach of the management regulations.
Commendably brief, Bruce, although we will come back to some of the questions in a second. So, Tom, do you have any questions or comments about this? No. Right, okay. Luke.
Yeah, just to follow out of that last point, so you're saying that on principle the tenants could be fined rather than the landlord, but then sometimes the landlord can be fined. Now, I mean, I would imagine that were I managing, if I had a house in multiple occupation I was renting out, I would put together a sheet which would a sheet of A4, and it would say you should do this, 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 and this. Now, whether they would actually do that or not is anyone's guess, but it's very easy to have that sheet. If someone did have that, if a landlord did prepare such a sheet and therefore said it's tenant's responsibility, sign here before you can take the tenancy, does that automatically transfer the fines onto the tenant?
That certainly would provide the evidence that the landlord has communicated it to the tenant themselves. So yes, the tenant would be more than liable for breach of Regulation 10 of the management regulations.
It's not exactly difficult to see a situation where the landlord and the tenant blame each other, and you're going to find someone, and you have to have a consistent position. What you can't obviously do is just have different officers doing different things on different days of the week. There has to be a clear protocol on who is responsible, and I think that might be. I think it would be worth having that clearly explained to everyone in terms of people who rent rooms and houses of multiple occupation and the people who rent them out are clear about what their responsibilities are and what the other party's responsibilities are.
Was that it, Luke?
Well, I've got another point which I was going to make at the end, actually, which I'll make it now.
If you can, yeah, that'd be lovely, yes.
Which is simply this, which is we've heard a number of points made about things which might happen, might not, about how this will actually work in practice. And I would therefore request that you consider, after a decent interval, a year, say, of this being in operation, bringing back a report with a review on this, just with some details about how it's been working out, and so that representatives such as we have here today can come along, make points, and you can, or you or whoever is in your post, can look at the matter at that time and learn from really the experience of the first year of this in operation.
Thank you for that, Luke. Thank you for that. I have a few questions of my own, some of which relate to what Alwyn and Martin have said, but also some of which have come up in my own mind. Some people have actually asked that we're not going far enough, and that actually we should be fining private rented flats, and we should be fining homeowners as well. Is that legally practical? Is that legally possible? I don't know.
Under this bit of legislation, no, it's not. It is a legislation based around houses in multiple occupation.
Okay, but it'd be my understanding is it will be difficult to find people, particularly homeowners, on private property. I'm sure all councillors have had trouble about trying to get fly tipping off private land and near people's garages and stuff like that. So would it be a similar situation?
It is a similar situation, but civil penalties don't come into that type of it. So what we would be looking at if it was accumulations of waste on private land or any other land, then we would be doing it under something called the Damage by Pests Act. We wouldn't be able to do it under the the management regulations in relation to houses in multiple occupation, which just places a duty on the person not to do the actual act, rather than if they do have an overgrown garden or accumulations in the garden, then we can do it under different bits of legislation. But that is just it's not a criminal offence as such as it is when you breach the management regulations.
Okay. Now, I want to a version of Alwyn and Martin's point, particularly Martin's point, has also come up, which is as Martin describes it as the parking ticket approach. And I think he's done that deliberately, because that creates an impression of essentially sniff a bag in a forecourt and they're going to get fined £5,000. Which also relates to Alwyn's approach as well. And when I've looked on the website in the past, when I've tried to move, and some aspects of actually knowing what is bulky waste and how much it costs and everything else, was as obtuse as a very obscure piece of classical music. I couldn't find out what the hell was going on. So what is the general approach? I mean, I've always thought that with civil penalties, it's educate, warn, fine. I'm assuming that is a similar approach that we will be adopting here, albeit it's a civil, not a criminal penalty.
That is correct. The legislation is saying that it places a duty so that therefore the landlord does not technically have to be notified prior to us taking any action, because it's under the management regulations. However, the policy is stating that as a fair and transparent local authority, we will provide the landlords with at least 3 days warning to remove any rubbish before we even consider taking any formal action.
And that is what is on page 13 of the report. That is correct, Bruce, is it not? Okay. The next point actually relates to a small thing that Martin raised earlier on, which is around the table, which for the people who have not seen the reports and are watching on the web is on page 4, it is table 4.5. It talks about an increase in complaints. So, for instance, in 2015-16, it was 94. In 2017-18, the last full year we have, it's 187. And in 2018-19, it is already 66. Does that relate purely to houses in multiple occupation, or is that just everybody, Bruce?
That is purely complaints we received about houses in multiple occupation.
Okay. And when was the cut-off point for the 66? Because that sounds like a lot in a little time.
That will be roughly about 2 weeks ago when the report was initially written.
So we would be looking, Bruce, at around about, if it carries on as it is, what, 300, 350 complaints this year if it carried on as it is? I'm trying to do maths of 8 weeks and stuff like that.
About 250.
About 250.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to come back to a couple of things Olwyn in particular raised, which was around trying not to dock the deposit and charges and things, and also around trying to be clear on the website around what is going on. Would it be, I would suggest that we try and be as clear as possible on the website when we put up about what qualifies, what doesn't, and what the circumstances are, because I think that will create some clarity in what is going on. I think Olwyn is there are a lot of points in which I nodded sagely as far as Olwyn is concerned, but landlords do screw up from time to time. And I think we need to make sure that this is okay. But would you be okay with all that? I'm asking you to do that.
Yes, certainly. Well, once the report has been approved, we can provide all the communications on the City Council website.
That would be hugely, hugely helpful as far as I'm concerned. Now, the other thing seems to be, one of the things I picked up from Olwyn and Martin's deputations, and I may have got this wrong, is the sense that this is all being done in isolation. Are there any other initiatives that are going on which might help in terms of making sure that people in HMOs might actually be able to put their bins in bins as opposed to sort of leaving it in forecourts? Olwyn was particularly concerned, I think, about, it's left for weeks and it will never get collected. So I'm assuming that there's some other work going on. Correction, I know there's some other work going on, but it would be quite useful to have that confirmed by the officer corps.
Yes, I know that the waste management team have been trialling the rollout of wheelie bins for rubbish, and that's been approved, I believe, to happen across most parts of the city, so that instead of bags being left out, bins will be available. Bins are being made available to, or advice has been given to HMOs as to the appropriate sorts of bins, so that the right size of bins are in HMO forecourts, so that tenants have got every possible opportunity to deal with their waste properly.
Thank you for that, Paul. That's mildly encouraging. I understand there's also an additional capacity allowance as well as being able to access extra bins for people in HMOs, because obviously it's a slightly different ballgame to accessing it in normal houses. And I understand weekly bin collections are staying as well as part of the package, which means in other authorities whereby you've got fortnightly bin collections, landlords are clearly tearing their hair out, and tenants, as you say, are getting off scot-free. So I think with the reassurance of weekly bin collections, that might be quite useful. You wish to say something on it?
It's just to say that the issue really is very often the complaints we get from neighbours, because all our neighbours know us, is at end of tenancy waste, and it's that bulk issue. And what I wouldn't want to see is a repetition with wheelie bins of the trial that we had with Seagull fruit-proof bags in Fratton, which was fabulous. We sat and watched tenants running across the road and fly tipping each other's forecourts as they'd gone, because their Seagull fruit bag was gone. And I promise you, I had 2 days after one of my groups of tenants checked out in Rennie Road, I promise you the forecourt was full, and it wasn't when they left. It was fly tipped because they were out of their own capacity, so they decided to do ours.
I know from speaking to not that. But I know, speaking to the Cabinet member, and I'm sure Councillor Coles, being a councillor for Fratton, may or may not concur with this, that actually that was one of the reasons why we've offered. We've changed it slightly from the trial that was put forward rightly by the previous administration, and actually offered up an additional capacity allowance, because we know particularly in some of those flat-fronted bits of Fratton, which may or may not be near where Tom lives, it was a nightmare. And that's why I'm pleased that that work is going along alongside this. Sorry, Maria and Residents Consortium colleagues, I ignored you and I apologise. Please, if you have anything to say, please do. If you don't have anything to say, also please don't.
Just speaking as a resident of an area that's surrounded by HMOs, we just feel that anything that the council can do to help clear the rubbish, it is a continual nightmare. It's not just the seagulls, it's the rats as well, because it's food waste that's being left lying around. So anything at all that will help clear that up has got to be good for us.
Thank you very much for that.
CLG, I've got a couple
apologies. Apologies, my friend.
I've got a couple of observations. Okay, just picking up on what these gentlemen have said about the end of turn times. I mean, I get what he's saying about fly tipping, but realistically, we have a higher rate of HMOs in this city compared to any other city in the country, as we're an island city. So really, I agree with what's going on in here, but I also feel it is the onus on the landlord to gear up for term times. And something that needs to be put more specific forward to help the landlords in that area when it comes to the end of term, to help with the excess of rubbish. I mean, amongst the 66 complaints, I'm certainly own up to one of those, because the HMO opposite me, they were putting out rubbish up to a week early. As soon as the bin man had been, they was putting out rubbish. Seagulls were ripping the bags apart. I phoned up the council, and basically they just said, well, see how it goes, sort of thing. Phoned up the following week. They were quite surprised that the bin man had actually taken the bin bags away. The other thing that I noticed as well, which we haven't spoken about, is recycling. Because the three ladies that were staying in that residence, they dumped about good 20 boxes, empty boxes. Now, right where I live, we've got a recycling bin. Right behind where I live, you've got recycling bins. What they do? Leave the rubbish outside on the street. So maybe we should look at that as well.
And I think your comments reflect actually the written deputation that we have from Dr. Scott. I've been in correspondence with Dr. Scott of Fratton about various aspects of what's going on, particularly with HMOs in her own road, including one next door. She raises a range of issues, which, some of which involve transparency with the local authority, which are issues that I am in the process of dealing with. The relevant, I'll just read out a couple of relevant things. I'll read out a couple of relevant paragraphs. The item 3, which is what we're discussing now before the Cabinet member today, is very timely, and I'm in support of it. For those Portsmouth residents unfortunate enough to live next door to a HMO from hell, sometimes a student HMO, sometimes poorly managed by an absentee landlord, any measures which help tackle genuine nuisance will be welcome. Student HMOs in particular tend to have groups of tenants who change year on year, so it's like playing, quote, whack-a-mole. I have no idea what whack-a-mole is. Reporting them to the ever-busy noise team or university. Somebody tell me what whack-a-mole is later, please. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. You'll come here again. Persistent, very loud noise in the early hours, sort of stuff Olwen was talking about, waking up neighbours, rotting bags of rubbish in back gardens and forecourts with no attempt to recycle, thank you, sir. Other nuisance, it's demoralising to live next door to year on year. I live in a zone with the seagull-proof sacks, and still the cycle of HMOs failing to comply and producing excess waste and mets is allowed to go on. And yes, it's time the landlords were focused on more. The landlords are the constant in this. Their tenants come and go. Their rent checks keep on coming. And as another response to that in connection with this, anyway, the item 3 before the Cabinet member today is a start. And to him I'd say, keep going. There's more to do. Just to offer a slightly different perspective. to what we've offered before. I've changed my mind on how I thought I was going to do this. Tom and Luke, do you have any particular comments at all before I sum up the discussion?
Only really just to ask again to repeat whether you'll consider having a review on this, and then the other practical one, which I should have asked about earlier, but it's sort of lost in the direction on this now. So, but it's simply that, you know, when you've got multiple people living in a house, how do you possibly ascribe the rubbish to one individual? Because that's the difficulty of it, isn't it? I mean, I live in a block of flats, not HMOs in there. But some of them have been rented out, and we have, when tenants move out, it's pretty obvious which one, because only one tenant's moving out at a time. We know who's dumped all the rubbish out the back. But between us, as the sort of leaseholders, we all end up paying part of the bill anyway, because the person just denies it, and what can we do? We still have to have it removed. So it feels a lot like that situation. So I think there's quite a lot of practicalities, and actually, you know, it's a good idea, but actually to make this work and enforcement, I think it's pretty tricky.
Thank you for that, Luke. I think it's my turn now. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Abraham. Yes, please put your microphone on as well.
Yeah, concerning about these rubbishes, I dearly love this country. I respect everybody in officials. As a matter of fact, I've been a volunteer for the housing service since 2003 and up to the present. And I'm trying to do something in the country because I'm alone here in this country. My family were on my country. Now, the management of the Green and Clean may know, like every floor in the building where I live, which one they have always problem, and maybe notice it's in the record of the computer screen, which floor is always the refusal is always broken and all black up. And of course, I am thinking there is something to do with to also include the people to learn about how to manage their rubbishes also, and to help improve the community, because it all affects especially the youth who are becoming like antisocial behavior, and also these rubbishes along the road, like for instance near the ASDA. Sometimes the people really put out the rubbish bin very full, and then extra bags outside that box. But sometimes the animals, like the squirrels and the foxes, they spread it. So I think there is something to do to be a bit more understanding, and it's not all the fault of the officials, but also something to educate people and children and young adults, please. Thank you.
Mrs. Abraham, thank you very much. Please turn your microphone off.
Sorry.
That's all right, don't worry. It floors many councillors when they come in here, so we're very grateful to you for coming. I think it is my turn to sum up the discussion. I think for too long, people in the city have had politicians say to them that people don't care about a cleaner city. They don't care about pavement politics issues like litter or dog mess and those sorts of things. And whenever I talk to anybody across the city, I get laughed at if I mention that, because they do care. And they want to see a council that's taking action across the piece in terms of trying to make the city cleaner. We do not have the cleanest streets in the country. Let's be a bit more politically incorrect about this. We do not have the cleanest streets in the country. Our streets are good and clean, but they're not the cleanest, and they could be cleaner. And I think what we have to do, what we want to do as an administration is to use every power we can to try and deliver that, to make sure our city is cleaner, realising it will never be spotless, but we want to make it cleaner. And this is one way in which we can do that. I think some of the points have been very interesting. And I think that the pragmatic approach that Bruce has outlined, which builds on some of the work that's been done already, around educating people. Already, as you probably know, there are already teams in certain parts of Central South Sea, for instance, which are local panels which are already working with HMOs to try and encourage people to work together and work with the university is always very, very helpful. But it's also clear from the rise in complaints, which is just going to continue, that something needs to be done and deterrence needs to occur. 60 quid is not a deterrent. I'm sorry, but it isn't. And I think it's a deterrent that shouldn't be focused purely on landlords. I think Olwyn and Martin make fair points about that. We need to be as open as we can about everything and as realistic as we can about everything. I also think that because this is not being done in isolation, I think that will also offer assistance. There is a carrot and stick approach from this administration. We are encouraging wheelie bins. We're also encouraging more capacity, learning on the Seagull-proof sacks trial in Fratton, giving more capacity to HMOs because we know there's a significant amount of rubbish being generated. I take the point about recycling, and it's something that we're already under discussions about. So I think the deterrent sign, the pragmatic approach will work, but we have to send a message that we are serious about dealing with this issue, and people do complain. And it's always difficult when a landlord receives complaints or tenants receive complaints, and there's always a bit of a blame game, I know. But we do receive complaints, and it is time that the message goes out that we are tough on this, which is why I'm happy to approve the report as it stands with 2 extra caveats. The first is an additional recommendation, which is to take on Luke's point, so recommendation 2.2, Joanne, which is that we will review this. I think given where we are, Luke, a year might be a little bit too quick, but the end of 2019 sounds quite realistic. We renewed additional HMO licensing after 5 years because that was the legal period we had to do. It was right to do that, and I think a review is sensible. But a year, I think, wouldn't encapsulate every single aspect of everything. We want to get through 2 cycles of the end of tenancy and the end of the end of the school year to make sure, the end of the university year to make sure it happens. And the second one is for Bruce to work up ways in which we can be, it's not a recommendation because this is an implementation issue rather than a policy thing, but to make sure that we're as open and as transparent as possible about where it goes and what it does, and that's something that's very, very easy to do on the website. So with that additional recommendation and that extra caveat, which has been webcast, so therefore everybody can hold me to account on it, I am delighted to approve this report. Colleagues, thank you very much for coming, particularly Martin and Olwyn. Now, moving on, we've got another item on the agenda, which is actually not in writing. Martin Olwyn, if you wish to stay for the next one, please feel free. It's only 20 to 6 for football fans, which is a verbal update on the rehousing of households from 2 tower blocks in Somerstown, Leamington House and Horatia House. I've asked for this to happen in the interest of openness and transparency. James, feel free.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. So, if you don't mind, I'll just give a little bit of background as I answer the question, touch on how the project is going to be managed going forward so that people will have some idea of the key points of contact should there be ongoing concerns, and then actually answer the question in terms of the latest position with regard to the rehousing. So just by way of background, people will know that on the 5th of June, residents in Horatia and Leamington House were informed about the issue of the concrete strength and that we would be rehousing all residents in both blocks. Approximately 70 staff from across the Directorate and agencies like Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service were involved in that initial phase as we visited residents and delivered the news to them. And we began the process of checking sheds, talking to residents, visiting flats, and gathering all the information that we would need to commence the rehousing. A dedicated 24-hour helpline was established. We had a dedicated email address. The Air Office opening hours were extended, and we opened over the first weekend of that initial phase. And the Fire Watch service, which had been in place since we dealt with the cladding issues, was adjusted to become a concierge stroke security service in both blocks. What became very apparent to us all engaged in this So what became apparent to us very quickly was that the residents themselves felt assured with the information that was being provided, and we had no need to provide emergency temporary accommodation. So we were very quickly able to stand down the contingency plans that we had in place should that eventuality arise. During the week commencing the 11th of June, the Air Office opening hours went back to normal, but the helpline continued to operate, and a dedicated rehousing team was formed to continue to discuss the rehousing with the residents in both blocks. And we issued a letter to our residents in the two blocks on the 12th of June, which confirmed all of those arrangements and the ongoing arrangements. So that's just by way of background in terms of what we dealt with back in the first few weeks. There is a project team which is dedicated to the task of dealing with the rehousing of both blocks, and that will be in place from now all the way through to spring, which is the timeline that we've talked to in terms of when people will be rehoused over what period. The rehousing team is led by Joanne Bennett, and she has at her disposal officers, who will be dealing with the rehousing of residents. They consist of new tenancy officers, support workers and specialists assigned to the project. The area housing team, based in Somerstown, is led by David Mearns and Dave Sambles. They will continue to provide regular communication updates to our residents, ward councillors and so on. They're going to monitor the security arrangements that we have in place in both blocks, and the housing officers connected to both blocks will continue to work with the rehousing team and residents within the two tower blocks. We have a technical team that's working alongside all of that activity. So as we rehouse tenants and we have empty properties within the blocks, Steve Groves will focus on working with our contractors to secure the building, and also to step ahead to look at the options for the strengthening works amongst other options for the two blocks. So as you can see, there's a project in place, a project team. The team are meeting regularly, at least every 2 weeks, with oversight provided by the Assistant Director of Housing, Paul Fielding, and there are regular reports coming through to me and available to me as and when I want to have them, as well as to yourself as the Cabinet Member of Housing and others as they request information. The dedicated 24-hour helpline remains in place, so for any residents in the blocks who don't have that day-to-day contact with the teams, there is a telephone number which will remain in place for any ongoing concerns. And the email, dedicated email address that we set up still remains active. So again, if anyone has any concerns either within the block or the surrounding areas and so on, there is somewhere that people can go and express those concerns. Just before I move on to give the latest position, I think this is the first opportunity, Chair, if I may, if you indulge me, just to say a personal thanks to all those that were involved. So I would like to take this opportunity to publicly thank the staff, both from my own directorate, from other directorates within PCC and from the partner agencies that worked tirelessly in the run-up to the announcement and through those first few weeks. Many of the staff worked long, hard hours and certainly beyond their normal remit of their day jobs. They showed great flexibility and compassion when dealing with the concerns of the residents as they received the news. And bearing in mind that the large part of those team knew nothing about this until the 4th of June, the briefings enabled them to liaise and support the residents in a very positive way. More importantly, this is the first opportunity I have to publicly thank our residents in both blocks, many of whom have taken the news in their stride. We saw the same calm response when we first learned of the issue about the cladding, and again when we told them about the issue of the concrete strength, they understood the situation. Whilst naturally there are concerns, the residents have shown great understanding at the situation we faced and are cooperating with the teams that are in place to support them as we go through the rehousing. In terms of the latest position around the rehousing then, To start with, there are 272 flats in both blocks, so 136 flats in each. On the 4th of June, when we made the announcement, there were 252 properties that were occupied. Since that time, 2 households have moved out of the blocks on planned management moves. So they were management moves that were already in the process and have been progressed to their conclusion. And we've also re-provided 4 flats within the 2 blocks that are provided to the E.C. Roberts Centre, and they've been provided elsewhere. So as of yesterday, which is when these figures are, which these figures represent, we have 246 flats that remain occupied and are the focus of our attention in terms of the rehousing going forward. We've spoken to all 246 households, some in more detail than others, but they've all been spoken to, and we've got initial information from all, which enables us to, gives us a good understanding of their initial rehousing needs. We have started to allocate properties matched to need and based on the properties that are becoming available. So we have 54 households who are at some part of the process of moving out of the 2 tower blocks. To break that down, 28 households have been made offers and are going through the arrangements to view their properties. 26 households have been made an offer, they've viewed their new properties and they've accepted the offer, and moves are now being planned with them. And I think the first move actually is due to take place on the 20th of July. And obviously the pace will pick up in terms of the number of people moving out of both blocks as more enter the process of allocation and offer. Now clearly that position will change dynamically and is changing every single day because of the focus. But as it stands, we remain confident in the commitments we've made for the rehousing to take place between now and spring of 2019. We have also been asked about people's choice and where people are asking to be moved to. The caveat in me talking to this is that it's incredibly tricky to break down the numbers because residents can make more than one choice of area. So if you forgive me, these aren't going to add up to 246 because in some instances people are expressing a choice for more than one area. But I've broken it down into who wants to remain in the city south area, who wants to move off island, and who would like to move to Lee Park and Weacock Farm, just to give you a sense of people's choice. So we have 201 households who would like to remain in the city south areas as a preference. 78 households have said that they would like to remain in either Somerstown or in that surrounding area. 8 households have asked to move to the city north areas, so Cosham, Paulsgrove type areas, and 18 households have expressed a desire to move out of the city into the stock that we hold in Lee Park and Weacock Farm. And again, I can update and refresh those figures as and when you wish to see those, but that's the sort of information we're keeping track of. In terms of communications, we've recently written to the residents in both blocks on the 29th of June to update them on the current position, and we've committed to regular updates as people saw when we were removing the cladding. The letter also referenced the publication of the structural reports which are available on the PCC website and include an explanatory note in addition to those reports. We have also been invited to participate in discussions with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government as they seek to set up a forum to share practice and learning as more local authorities grapple with the issues that we've faced. And our Head of Build and Maintenance, Steve Groves, is attending the first of those meetings tomorrow. That should be incredibly useful for us because it will mean that we can continue to pursue discussions with the Ministry around funding, amongst other things. The Portsmouth City Council website does have some dedicated pages, so we are keeping on those pages all of the letters and information that's been released to date. It includes the 2 reports that I've just referred to, and also the frequently asked questions, which again you can probably appreciate is being refreshed and updated as more questions unfold. Just by way of context, the update is based on 3 weeks of activity from a rehousing perspective. So to have that number of households already in the process and under offer is from my perspective, quite impressive, accepting though that of course from a resident's perspective what they want to know is how quickly am I going to be moved, and again we hold to the commitment that the rehousing is based on a timescale going through to spring 2019.
James, thank you very much. I'll now ask the opposition spokespeople if they have any questions or any comments. Tom, we're going to do alphabetical order in future, so Tom first.
Thank you. My main question is around the rents that they pay. Obviously, they're paying one rate in the towers they're in currently. Obviously, going to different sort of housing. Will their rent be protected, or will that go up? Because obviously, they're being moved of no fault of their own. So if they're going somewhere where there's, say, affordable rent, it's 80%, it could be significantly higher. Some households may struggle with that. My other point was going to be around location, but if they've got a preference, then that sort of sorts that one out. Thank you.
What I'll do is I'll take each individual question and then get a response from the officer. Luke, you will be next, if you wish.
I don't know if there's anything I want to ask at this point.
Oh, okay, fine, that's okay. So, but come back in. I was going to say butt in, which is completely unfair. Come back in whenever you feel like. James, could you please respond to Tom's points about rents, please?
There may well be instances where the rent charge is different. As part of the discussions with residents around the options available to them, we have a conversation around affordability. So the principle that drives this is that we wouldn't wish to place any household in a financially difficult position for want of this change. And those discussions are underway. Where the voids are becoming available from the housing stock, they tend to be at a social housing rent level. So for the vast majority of residents, they won't feel that change. But it is part of the discussion at that rehousing stage where we look at affordability and what it means to residents.
Sorry for that. Firstly, I apologise. I haven't done this for 4 years. I should have said, please turn off your mobile phones at the start, except for Fiona, who's allowed, from the news, who's allowed to keep it on. Her boss may want to talk to her. Luke, did you have... sorry, Tom, did you have anything else to ask at all?
No, that was all, thank you.
That's lovely. Luke, anything? No? Maria?
I've just got one small query. I've got friends living in Horatia House, and soon after this all happened, they were offered a flat in Tipton, but they couldn't have the keys until August, and so that was going back well over a month. I just wondered why there was such a long time from being told that they could have a flat in Tipton to when they get the keys.
I mean, I'm happy to look at the individual circumstances. Generally speaking, the timescale comes down to works required in the property they're moving into. There will likely have been a discussion about the flooring and amongst other things. So when people are moving into new flats, we've committed to a level of works which, going back to the kind of reason they're moving in the first place, is part of a package of support which includes floor coverings amongst other things. So there's typically a period of time where works are undertaken 2 to 3 weeks. In this case, there may be some additional time because of those other factors. But the principle we're working to really is that the timescales are determined by the works and from a household point of view as quickly as we can arrange for removals amongst other things. So 4 weeks doesn't feel unreasonable, but if the residents concerned have issues with that, please let me talk to them.
I would echo those comments as well, Maria. We're trying to balance up two things. We're trying to balance up doing the right thing by residents with the need to ensure everybody is out by next spring. So if there are any issues, particular issues involving individuals, could Residents Consortium CLG colleagues please just contact the rehousing team, although admittedly it's going to have to be with names and numbers of the block, unfortunately. Maria, did you have any further points at all? No? CLG colleagues? Sir?
I've got two questions. The first one, which we'll deal with first. I understand that there's going to be a financial impact. You're having to pay compensation and moving costs and such like. Plus then the cost of the buildings and such like. When will we know or have some sort of gauge of how much this is going to cost this city?
For conspiracy theorists, that was not deliberate. James.
So we know some of the costs already. So, for example, the home loss payment, which is in the FAQs, which are published online, is a statutory payment, which is £6,100. So I'm terrible at maths, but you know, there's a figure there that comes from how many flats are you rehousing, how many are entitled to that payment. In relation to the decladding costs to date, those are known to us. The other costs around the works to the two tower blocks, you know, are not known at this stage. We are looking at the options to strengthen the blocks, amongst other things, and that's a piece of work that's underway. Where the costs fall, people will know that we've had discussions with the DCLG, as was the Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government, and they've confirmed grant availability for the decladding and recladding costs. And the reason I referred to the forum earlier is because that will be a useful means for us to talk about any additional burdens that the city faces. They will largely fall to the HRA. This is a housing scheme funded by the HRA.
Sorry, Mr. Abrams, can I come back?
Right, the other question I have, which is just to do with the juggling that you have to do with moving people on, how does that affect other tenants that actually don't live in the blocks, but they're looking to move to more suitable accommodation, for example? Is that having an impact on what may happen to them?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. I mean, undoubtedly, we are rehousing two tower blocks which we didn't expect to rehouse in this year. So using up voids that become available to rehouse those households will undoubtedly have an impact. And again, the FAQs talks to that. I think we just need to put in context that the social housing that Portsmouth City Council holds is about 14,900 properties. On average per year, that generates approximately 900 voids, which are available to us. That consists of sheltered housing, etc. So whilst there is an impact in rehousing 246 households, we are using voids available to us, so there will still be available to us properties for those in priority housing need, as well as those that are requesting management moves for whatever reason. We are trying hard to limit the impact, but I can't deny that for some who are currently on the housing waiting list, there may be a longer period of wait for accommodation.
Mrs. Abrams, did you have anything?
I am thinking about because to help the people know everything, how about if we will have, like in the tower blocks, we will have a community room where we can, the officials can come and do the meeting, so that the people and the young people will know what is going on, so that's the way they will learn also. And also those who are not living in the tower block, like in the lower council flats, where they can attend also the meeting, community room or whatever. I don't know if you would agree. It's just an
You're incredibly
idea.
kind, and that's something I think we can take on. I will answer the initial thing, and James will answer in more detail. In the first few days of after people were told about the rehousing, housing officers were in the blocks, in the community rooms in each blocks, for 11, 12 hours a day. As people have been spoken to with their with what's called a rehousing survey, so everybody has been approached, as James said, that need has declined. However, as James has said, certain things are still in place. I know from talking to people in each of the blocks that trying to get them to attend community meetings has always been a bit difficult. A few people are incredibly active, but not everybody. I would suggest that's a process that's always put forward under review. But I think one of the lessons for me that was learnt from the excellent work the previous administration did under the decladding approach was that one-on-one, speaking to people individually, worked much better and got a more human response than in a meeting in which I have to say, and forgive me, but sometimes in meetings the loudest person shouts the loudest. And that's not necessarily, and I've done it myself in meetings, and that's not necessarily the best way forwards. James?
Really not much to add other than if the need arises, then you know, we're more than happy to space ourselves in the tower blocks. Invariably, the teams are pretty much there every single day anyway. What we're not hearing from residents in either blocks is that they feel as though we need to do anything different to that we're doing at this point. But you know, it's a good idea. Both blocks have got community rooms, so it would be very easy for us to do that should the need arise.
Sorry, I just say that because of the what you call the penalties about whoever are disobeying. And it's one way that I'm thinking is where everybody will know.
Thank you. I hope there are no penalties attached to this, but I think your concern is understandable, and I think we've...
it's just something, you know, my position at the moment, my status.
Yeah.
So maybe you will understand also.
That's always got to be kept under review, and we're very grateful to you for that. Please switch your microphone off again. Luke.
A really quick point of clarification now. One of the points was raised earlier. So when talking about cladding and the costs and so forth, James said something, I can't remember word for word what you said now, but I took it kind of implied that the government has said there won't be government funding beyond what there is for the cladding. Has that discussion taken place with the government about the costs of these other works? And if so, what's the outcome?
So no, at this point in time, we haven't discussed directly the costs associated with strengthening works or the other related costs. To date, the conversations have been focused on the decladding costs and recladding the two blocks. Again, if I go back to the point about the formation of the forum, and those ongoing discussions with the Ministry of Housing and CLG, that will give us the opportunity to talk to the situation that we now face.
Don't feel afraid to ask questions. I know to next week's council, this is actually going to be the only opportunity whereby we can actually discuss this in a public forum, as there's a full council meeting. There's a full 45 minutes of questions, usually to cabinet meetings, and there are absolutely none next week, including on this matter, which I have to say cheers cabinet members up no end, as you and I probably both know, Luke. So this is the only forum in which there will be these sorts of questions raised, in which people can be held to account. Any more, Luke? No, I have a few, if I may, and it revolves around just a few comments that I've just been reading around here, and just a few points of clarification. Some people have mentioned, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Some people have, I've read somewhere that people have talked about, you know, having to wait a year, more than a year, for blocks. Is that correct?
No. No. The rehousing timetable we've talked to is exactly that I referred to earlier. The rehousing team are having conversations with people about rehousing between June and spring next year. There's no deviation from that.
On the basis of the numbers you've given us with regards to who's going where, and also the number of voids that you've given as well, do you feel that, and again this has been picked up by some people, do you feel that there is just a shortage of accommodation in the city for for people moving out of these 2 blocks?
No, the model that we put together prior to the announcement and our knowledge now of the choices that people are expressing gives us confidence that we will meet the commitment to rehouse between now and spring next year. There's nothing in the early indications that suggests that won't be the case.
And my final question is actually to Meredith, in fact. These blocks were rehoused, people in them were rehoused several years ago, less than 20 years ago, in fact, if memory serves me right, which is a very similar project to what is going on now. An extensive refurbishment was occurring as a result of those 2 blocks. Was that project funded entirely out of the housing revenue account? I'm asking you to go back a decade and a half, I know.
You're correct, Councillor Sanders. Both projects, the recladding of Horatia and Leamington House, were funded from the HRA.
Okay. That's kind, Meredith. Colleagues, thank you very much. If I may, I'll just sum up and make a few observations, as this is probably the only time that this is going to be done in public before the summer break. I think what James has put forward reflects what people in each of the blocks have said to me and have said to local councillors in the area. The feeling has been very similar to the sense that was picked up around when the decladding occurred. I have heard a full gamut and a full range of emotions, from people who are crying to people who are going, thank God it means I can go to heaven. And people who are delighted that this is the chance for them to move. There is a full range of people and a full range of views within the 2 blocks, and I think it's only fair to thank everyone for their relative stoicism in all this. This is not great. It is not nice to be told that your home of 13 years may not be your home in 13 months. People have told me about their hope of going somewhere else and their fear that that might not happen. It's not nice to be told that the blocks that you've been living in for more than a decade may not be as strong as you thought they were. And that is highly, highly frustrating. I have to say, on taking over as the portfolio holder, I was only expecting a recladding job. I was not expecting what has happened. I don't think any of us want to do it. But when you're presented with the sort of structure reports that the administration published yesterday on the website, which say in one block that it is unsatisfactory for residential occupation unless significant remedial works are carried out, doing nothing is not an option. And I think we've picked that up across the city from the news and from elsewhere, that there is broad understanding of the decisions that have been taken and the massive rehousing project that's been put forward. We've based it on facts and realism, which is always very, very helpful. I think as we go forwards, there will always be issues with regards to rehousing. It is inevitable that that is going to happen. Inevitably, there will be people who will be unhappy. Inevitably, there is going to be an impact. No project like this can occur without there being an impact. However, what interests me is the number of void properties that currently exist, which is significantly, I have to say, than I feared when we started on this process. And I think there is some confidence that we will be able to rehouse people by next spring. And as a result, I would like to thank colleagues in the Officer Corps for their ability, their calmness and professionalism as this has gone on, and hopefully that will continue. As I said, we're very keen to be held to account on these issues throughout. And I would have loved it to have occurred next week at the full council meeting as well as today, but we've only got today. So I'm incredibly grateful to both Luke, Tom, Maria and CLG colleagues for holding us to account in that way. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Joe. I think I'm supposed to note the report. Is that how that works? Note the report and thank everyone for their efforts in what's been obviously an incredibly difficult experience. And a genuinely difficult decision, not purely because it's unpopular, because it's not in some quarters, but because it's difficult, because it's people's homes, people's lives, people's futures, and that's something that this administration is very keen to continue at the forefront of their minds for these blocks and elsewhere. I believe there is nothing else on the agenda, Joe, is that right? And therefore I believe at 12 minutes past 6. I take that as the time on the clock on the wall. I declare this meeting closed, and good luck, England. Thank you and good night.